Hi, baby.
What's up, baby?
You got the time to be in my video.
On the evening of January 25, 2025, emergency responders were called to a quiet apartment on the 6300 block of Newberry Road in Indianapolis, Indiana, where they discovered a horrifying scene. A 2-year-old girl was found lifeless beneath a dresser, her tiny body bruised, wounded, and far too still. Just hours earlier, her mother had returned home from spending the night away to meet her new boyfriend, unaware that the consequences of her choices had already spiraled into tragedy. At the center of it all was Chantel Gardner, a local rapper known as Chantel Monáe, who had carefully curated an image of ambition and success. But behind closed doors, her 2 young children were living in filth, hunger, and abandonment. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered chilling details that would shatter the public image Chantel had built. Discoveries that exposed a dark, heartbreaking truth the community would never forget. This is the life and death of Skylar Gardner.
Y'all must have knew I was gonna be on here talking shit. I'm not even about to talk shit, y'all. What y'all think? Tell me what y'all think. Y'all got on my status and y'all was being. Tell me. I'm gonna let y'all start off the conversation. Tell me what y'all think about this cipher.
This case takes us to Indianapolis, Indiana, a city that blends history, culture, and community pride, but one that has also struggled with violence and hardship. Known as the Crossroads of America, Indianapolis carries a reputation as a hub for opportunity and growth. Yet, like many American cities, it has areas plagued with poverty and higher than average crime rates. For families already facing challenges, these environments can intensify struggles behind closed doors. And it was in one of these neighborhoods that Skylar's short life unfolded. Skylar Gardner was born in Indiana, the youngest child of her mother, Chantel Gardner, a woman who would soon be at the center of this case. Skylar came into the world in 2022, joining her older brother, and from the beginning, she was described as bright, playful, and full of life. Family members recalled her smile lighting up every room she entered, a reminder of the innocence and joy that early childhood brings. Her mother, Chantel, was born in 1986 and grew up in Indianapolis. She was one of many children in her family, navigating her own path through a city that offered both promise and risk. In school, Chantel managed to graduate and later pursued her creative interests. Those who knew her described her as outspoken and ambitious, someone who often said she wanted more out of life than what her surroundings could offer. That ambition eventually led Chantel into music. Under the name Chantel Monáe, she began writing and recording tracks, blending raw lyrics with the determination of someone trying to break into the rap scene. She even shot music videos and promoted herself online, showcasing her bold personality. Music for Chantel was more than a hobby. It was her shot at reinvention, a way to turn her name into something bigger. But behind the stage persona was another reality. Her 2 young children were living depending on her. Balancing motherhood with her dreams of music was never easy. And it was in that tension between personal ambition and parental responsibility that cracks began to form. As Chantel pursued relationships, one in particular with a man named Brian Thomas, began to shift her focus further away from her role as a parent. She entered a romance that drew her time and attention, pulling her away from her children more often than anyone realized. What may have started as nights spent outside the home became a consistent pattern, leaving her children, a toddler and a preschooler, alone in the apartment for hours at a time. It was not an occasional lapse, but a routine she slipped into, one where her role as a mother took a backseat to her personal desires. Hours turned into long stretches of time, and those children were left to fend for themselves in ways no child should ever have to. The neglect showed itself in disturbing details. She would often return once a day, dropping off food and something to drink before leaving again. The children, too young to care for themselves, were found with feces on their hands and feet, a sign of just how little attention they received. Baths were rare, sometimes going more than a week without one, leaving them dirty and uncomfortable in their own home. The worst part was that Chantel knew she was neglecting her children. It wasn't hidden from her or lost in denial. She admitted it to herself, yet she continued on that same path, prioritizing her own desires instead of their needs. What the outside world saw was a confident woman chasing her dreams and projecting an image of control. But inside her home, her two young children were living in an environment that was anything but safe. The apartment was filled with trash, spoiled food, and filth, creating conditions no child should ever be forced to endure. The image Chantel presented online couldn't have been further from the truth. She shared music videos, photos, and a persona that seemed full of life. Yet her children were living in chaos, left in rooms that reeked of neglect while she chose to be somewhere else. Neighbors never saw the worst of it, but the reality inside those walls spoke louder than any words. The conditions were not the product of a single mistake, but the result of a pattern, a dangerous routine of absence, disregard, and abandonment that only grew worse. And then came the breaking point. For weeks of neglect would ultimately come at a devastating cost. On Saturday, January 25, 2025, the weeks of neglect reached their devastating climax. After days of leaving her children in an unlivable environment, Chantel would uncover the devastating discovery herself. That evening, in their apartment in 6300 block of Newberry Road in Indianapolis, Indiana, after making dinner, Chantel called her children to eat. Her firstborn son came into the kitchen, but something was off. Her 2-year-old girl wasn't with him as expected. Right then and there, she knew something was wrong. As she looked around the house, panic set in, as it was starting to sink in that her neglect had ultimately come with a consequence. And all of this anxiety brought her to a devastation when she found the 2-year-old Skylar lying motionless beneath the dresser. Chantel immediately panicked as she dropped to the floor, desperately trying to wake Skylar up. She shook her gently, called her name over and over, and even tried to scoop her into her arms as if warmth alone could bring her back. But the little girl wouldn't respond, her small body limp and lifeless. And in that moment, Chantel was forced to confront the devastating reality of what her neglect had led to. At 6:30 p.m. of that evening, Chantel called emergency services. But by the time paramedics arrived, they were immediately horrified by the condition of the home. Trash was scattered across the floor. Spoiled food left a heavy stench in the air, and feces were smeared on walls and furniture. It was more than just a dirty home. It was a place unfit for any child to live. But the horrors did not end there. The worst came when they found the condition the 2-year-old Skylar was in. As responders examined her small frame, the truth grew heavier with every mark they uncovered. Bruises darkened her face, arms, legs, and back, signs of pain no child should ever bear. A puncture wound on her neck deepened the unease, suggesting that her suffering had been both prolonged and violent. But the worst of all, Skylar even had injuries in her private areas. And then came the shattering realization. When they found Skylar, she was already gone. That single call to police marked the turning point of the case. What initially came across as a tragedy inside a private home quickly unraveled into a criminal investigation that revealed patterns of abandonment, neglect, and horrifying conditions no child should ever have endured. The investigation into the death of 2-year-old Skylar began the moment authorities stepped into that Indianapolis apartment. What they found underscored just how severe the situation truly was. The conditions of the home were already beyond acceptable, serving as a stark reminder of the neglect the children had been enduring. Rather than revealing anything new, the scene emphasized the depth of abandonment that had become their everyday reality. As investigators examined the state of the home and listened to Chantel's account, a deeply troubling narrative began to emerge. Chantel admitted that she routinely left her children alone, sometimes for hours at a time while she stayed elsewhere. She said she would return once a day to drop off food and something to drink, but that was the extent of her care. She openly acknowledged that her children would often be covered in filth, even confessing that she could recall a time when one had gone nearly 2 weeks without a bath. Perhaps most chilling was the fact that Chantel knew she was neglecting them. She admitted as much, yet she continued down that same destructive path, leaving her children vulnerable night after night. The details became more disturbing as investigators pressed forward. Skylar and her brother were left to fend for themselves in an apartment filled with dangers. Unsanitary conditions, sharp objects scattered around, and no adult supervision to protect them. It was a cycle of abandonment that escalated with every passing day. What neighbors assumed was just a quiet household was in reality a hidden site of neglect where 2 children were forced into survival, far beyond their years.
In this situation, you have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. Clearly, they're not able to stay by themselves. The state has a good case to show that she was neglect of a dependent.
Attention also turned toward Brian Thomas, the man who had been romantically linked to Chantel. His role in this tragedy could not be overlooked. While Chantel was spending nights at his home, her own children were left unattended. Even Thomas admitted that she stayed with him nearly every night, though the children were rarely brought along, only visiting once a week at most. Though he would later deny direct involvement, the very fact that he was aware of Chantel's absences placed him in the shadow of accountability. It was not a matter of ignorance. He had been close enough to know the pattern and far too willing to let it continue. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer the picture became. Skylar's death was not the result of a single lapse in judgment, but of repeated, conscious choices made by her mother and enabled by the relationship she kept. Each revelation stripped away the image Chantel had crafted online as a bold, independent artist. Instead, what remained was a chilling reality of neglect, deception, and abandonment. With Skylar gone, the law could no longer look the other way. The case was no longer a private matter, but a public tragedy, one that demanded accountability. And so the focus shifted from the investigation. In the weeks that followed Skylar's death, the case against Chantel Gardner moved swiftly through the courts. Prosecutors charged her with neglect of a dependent resulting in death, a Level 1 felony under Indiana law. This charge carried a potential sentence of up to 40 years in prison, underscoring the seriousness of what had happened inside that apartment. Alongside her, Brian Thomas was also charged, though his count focused on assisting a criminal, reflecting his role in enabling the neglect by allowing it to continue without intervention. In court, the grim details resurfaced. Medical examiners testified to the injuries Skylar had suffered: bruises scattered across her tiny body, a puncture wound on her neck, and the signs of prolonged mistreatment. These findings painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. Though Chantel denied causing physical harm herself, her admissions of abandonment and neglect carried their own weight. It became clear that Skylar's suffering was not sudden, but a gradual decline in circumstances that should have been prevented. The defense attempted to frame Chantel as overwhelmed, pointing to her struggles as a single mother and her aspirations in music. But for the prosecution, the evidence of deliberate neglect overshadowed any claims of hardship. The fact that Chantel knew her actions were neglectful and continued them anyway stood as the most damning proof of her culpability. As testimony continued, the focus also shifted toward Thomas. His own statements showed that he was aware of the children being left behind, yet he did nothing meaningful to stop it. For many watching, his lack of intervention was nearly as troubling as Chantel's abandonment itself. While his charges were lesser, his role remained a point of public outrage, cementing the sense that multiple adults had failed Skylar when she needed protection most. The trial revealed more than just facts. It revealed the fracture between Chantel's public persona and her private reality. Online, she had presented herself as a confident rapper chasing success, but in court, she was revealed as a mother who repeatedly chose her personal desires over her children's safety. The contrast was painful, a reminder of how appearances can mask devastating truths. Outside the courtroom, the case ignited a storm of anger and sorrow. Community members, neighbors, and even strangers filled social media with their grief and disbelief. Posts poured in mourning Skylar, a little girl described as bright and full of joy, whose life had been extinguished far too soon. Others vented frustration at both Chantel and Thomas, condemning their choices and demanding justice. The story became more than a local tragedy. It was a cautionary tale that reached far beyond Indianapolis. Ultimately, the case left behind painful lessons. It underscored the importance of vigilance, of neighbors, relatives, and friends recognizing signs of neglect and stepping forward before it is too late. It also raised questions about accountability, not just for the mother who abandoned her children, but for anyone who stood by while it happened. Skylar Gardner's short life serves as a heartbreaking reminder of what happens when neglect goes unchecked. She was 2 years old, with her entire future ahead of her. Instead, her story became a call to action. A call to protect children, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to ensure no other child suffers the way Skylar did. May Skylar rest in peace, and may her memory push us all to do better. For every child deserves safety, love, and a chance to grow. What do you think about it? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and if you found this story intriguing, please like, share, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.